darlings, Mimi G here with another amazing tutorial as part of the Mimi G for Michael Levine collaboration. Today we're going to be doing a very easy maxi dress, so let's get started. I'm going to be using a black challis. Now you can use any lightweight cotton that you might have. Really any lightweight woven will work for this project. The lighter the better, because the lighter the fabric, the more flowy it will be. You can also use a chambray if you have one. That would be really cool. Denim is really in at the moment, so if you can find something like that, that would be really cool. But like I said, for the purpose of this tutorial, and so you guys can see what I'm doing, I'm going to be using this black fabric. You're going to need at least 3 yards of it, depending on how tall you are and how long you want your maxi dress to be. And you're also going to need a yardstick or a ruler, whichever one you have is fine. You're going to need some scissors, of course. You're going to need something to write onto your fabric with, so either a piece of chalk or just this chalk roller that I use are really handy. You're going to need a tape measure, because we're going to be taking some measurements. You're going to need, of course, some pins, some pattern weights. These are just large washers that I get at my local home improvement store. And you're going to need some non-row elastic. Now I'm going to be using a black one because I'm using black fabric, and so I'm just coordinating. But you can use white elastic. This is 3/4 inches wide, so you can use either a 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch, whichever one you have handy will work just fine for this project. We're going to need to take some measurements, so get your tape measure. And we're going to start with our hip measurement. You're going to measure around the fullest part of your hip, then you're going to add 5 inches, and then you're going to divide that number by 4. Now you're going to take a length measurement. You're going to measure from your belly button all the way down to the floor, and then you're going to add 2 inches. Now remember, if you're planning to wear your maxi dress with heels, go put your heels on now and then take that measurement. If you plan to wear your maxi dress with flats, then go ahead and take the measurement with flats on. Now remember, you're going to take your hip measurement plus 5 inches. Then you're going to divide that by 4. Then you're going to do your belly button to the floor plus 2 inches. Set that number aside. Now the next measurement you're going to take is from your shoulder down to your belly button, and you're going to add 2 inches. So shoulder to belly button, 2 inches. Belly button to floor plus 2 inches. Hip plus 5 divided by 4. Now we're going to lay out your fabric. So what you're going to do is you're going to fold your fabric in half lengthwise with selvage edges meeting and right sides together. Right sides meaning if your fabric has a definite wrong and right side, the right side of your fabric, the one that people are going to see, should be facing each other, because we're going to be marking on the wrong side. Now the fold is away from me, but it doesn't matter. We're not cutting anything on the fold today. Now you want to make sure you don't have any wrinkles in your fabric. So if your fabric is wrinkled, give it a good press before you start making any markings. I have taken my measurements and I have them with me. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create the rectangles for the bodice. Now my measurement from shoulder to belly button plus 2 inches is 19.5 inches. Now whatever that is for you, that's what you're going to mark. My hip plus 5 inches divided by 4 gives me 11.25 inches. So that's my measurement. Now I'm going to create a rectangle. The first measurement is going to be the 19.5. That's the length of our bodice. So I'm going to be working about 2.5 inches from the edge of my fabric. And I'm going to make a line that's 19.5 inches long. And then I'm going to make another line that is 11.25 inches. That's going to be the width of one of our rectangles. And then do the same at the top, 11.25 inches. And then you're going to close out your rectangle. Now you've created a rectangle. Mine is 19.5 inches by 11.25 inches, because those were my measurements. Make sure that you're using your measurements and not mine. And I'm going to go ahead and cut this out. Now we have 2 rectangles, but we need 4. So what you're going to do is you're going to do the exact same thing that we just did again so that you end up with 4 rectangles. Then we're going to move on to the skirt portion of our dress. Now you should have 4 rectangles for your bodice. And what I want you to do is I want you to lay them on top of each other so that they're aligned. Okay, so you should have 4 layers. And what you're going to do is we're going to create a little marking to let us know where our armhole is going to end and where our neckline is going to end. And so what you're going to do is you're going to measure down from the top 10 inches for the armhole, right? So we're going to measure down 10 inches. And what you're going to do is you're going to make 2 very small snips. Literally snip and then move over just a bit and snip again. So we're going to create 2 notches. Snip and snip. They're literally like just very tiny snips, not even 1/4 of an inch deep. And then you're going to measure again on the other side from the top down 8 inches. And you're going to just make 1 snip through all layers. Now on this, let me just show you here. So on one side you're going to have 2 little notches. And on one side you're going to have 1 notch. Now this serves 2 purposes. It lets us know where we're going to stop sewing, of course, for the arm and for the neckline, but it also, the 2 notches will let you know that that side is for the arm and the 1 notch is for the center where our neckline will be. So make sure that you have that. You're going to set that aside. And remember, if you like your V a little lower, you can make it as deep as you want. I'm only doing 8 inches because that's where I'm comfortable. It lands just below this necklace here, and so that's what I'm comfortable with, but you can make whatever changes you want to it. You can make it deeper or higher. So we're going to set that aside, and now we're going to start cutting out our skirt portion of our dress. So I have my fabric laid out. Make sure you don't have any wrinkles. And so I'm going to take the measurement that I took from my belly button down to the floor. I plan to wear my maxi dress with heels because it makes me feel taller, more elegant. And so I'm going to measure down 47 inches. So I'm going to make a mark at the top and working about 2.5 inches away from the edge of my fabric. I'm going to make 1 very long line. It's 47 inches long. Now we're going to cut out 4 of these rectangles, long rectangles like we did the top. So we're using the same measurement of your hip plus 5 divided by 4 for the width. That does not change. So for me that was 11.25. So I'm going to do at the very top of the skirt 11.25. And I'm going to make a straight line on the top. Now we want our maxi skirt to flare out just a bit at the bottom, right? So at the bottom where our skirt is going to end, I'm actually going to add 6 inches to my measurement. So that 11.25 plus 6 inches. And I'm going to make a line across. Now instead of making 1 straight line, we're going to angle that line and we're going to connect the 11.25 line at the top to the new hemline at the bottom, creating an A-line effect. Now we have the 2 panels for the front of our skirt, and we're going to cut this same exact thing out again so that we end up with 4 of these, just like we did the top. So go ahead and cut out your panels. Now we don't want to confuse our pieces. So what you're going to do is for the straight line that is in front of you, you're going to make anywhere along the length of it. It doesn't matter. We're just going to make a little snippet just so that I know that this is the center of our skirt. And then on the other side, the angled length, we're going to make 2 snippets. Now set this aside and do it again so that you end up with 4 pieces. Okay, we're all done cutting out, so let's just review. You should have 4 layers of the bodice and you should have 4 layers of the skirt. Now we're going to take all of our pieces over to the sewing machine and we're going to get started. Okay, we're going to be working with 2 pieces at a time. So grab 2 of your bodice rectangles, and as you can see, I have finished off the long edges of my panels using my serger. If you don't have a serger, it's okay. You can use a zigzag machine, a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine, and that'll do the job. I just find it easier to finish my edges now as opposed to as I'm sewing for the bodice. And now what we're going to do is you're going to place 2 panels right sides facing if you have a right side, and you're going to pin at the 8-inch mark. Remember, we made a small little slit from the top to the bottom when we measured 8 inches. And so what you're going to do is you're going to place your sewing machine at the, your fabric under your presser foot, and using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, we're going to sew from that 8-inch mark all the way down. And so I want you to go ahead and use a back stitch at the beginning and at the end of your stitching. So when we open that up, we have our neck opening. And so we're going to do the same exact thing to the other one. So you're going to place them right sides facing, and starting at the 8-inch mark, we're going to sew all the way down. Now I want you to take this to your ironing table and I want you to press this seam open. And you're going to also press that same amount of seam allowance on the top. I have pressed my seams open, as you can see, and then I just went ahead and pressed that seam allowance all the way up the top, just because it makes it easier to do now, and then sew our neckline a little later. So now that we have that, we're going to lay both of these with right sides together. And we're going to go ahead and pin at that 10-inch mark. You have those 2 notches there. And then do the same thing on the other side. And now we're going to sew from that 10-inch mark all the way down, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then do the same thing on the other side. Okay, now we have sewn the sides of our bodice, and now we're going to sew our shoulders. So this unfinished edge that you see here, this is your shoulder. So we're going to sew using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to back stitch at the beginning and at the end. If you have a serger, go ahead and finish off the top or finish it off using your zigzag stitch. Do not cut off the excess seam allowance. We're going to need all of this seam allowance, so do not cut it off. Sew the other shoulder the same way. Now we have both shoulders sewn. I'm going to go ahead and finish off my shoulder edges, and then we'll come and do a little bit of gathering. I have finished the shoulder edges of my dress using my serger. And so now what we want to do is we're going to create some gathering stitches along the shoulder. So we're going to gather the shoulder together. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to create gathering stitches along the seam allowance of our shoulder. So using the longest stitch and starting about 5/8 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric and sewing only on the seam allowance, go ahead and use the longest stitch that you can. Yours might be a 4 or 5 or a 6. Mine goes up to a 6. And in that seam allowance, we're going to create 2 rows of stitching. Stop 5/8 of an inch from the other edge and do not backstitch. Leave long tails and then going back and just moving about a 1/4 inch away from the first line of stitches, you're going to sew again. Now we have 2 long tails. Using the 2 pieces of thread from the top, these 2, we're going to pull until your fabric starts to gather. Be gentle, you don't want to break your thread. Until the top of your shoulder measures about 5 inches. You're going to cut a bit of that tail, and I want you to tie this off. So you're just going to tie it off because you don't want your gathering stitches to shift. So that creates enough of a knot that it won't. And then because we want to secure this, we're going to turn it to the right side. So your shoulder looks like this on the right side. And what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that our seam allowance is all to one side. Doesn't matter what side. You're just going to make sure that it's all facing one direction. And on the very top, we're just going to sew. Now I have all of my seam allowance to the left of me, as you can see. And so I'm going to place my needle a 1/4 inch away from my shoulder seam. So I'm going to adjust my needle. And using a regular 2.5 stitch in length, I'm going to sew and just pulling it open. Now that'll make sure that my gathering stitches do not come undone. You're going to do the same exact thing to the other shoulder. Now that we're done sewing the top of our dress, we have gathered our shoulders. You should have finished off your neckline and your armhole by turning under a 1/2 inch seam allowance and then sewing a 1/4 inch away from the edge. And so we're going to set this aside now, and we're going to start sewing together the skirt portion of our dress, and then we're going to join them. I have 2 panels for the front of my skirt. The other 2 panels will be used for the back of our skirt. And so I am going to go ahead and pin at that 1 notch that signified that this was the center front of our skirt. And I'm just going to pin it there. And then if you need to, you can pin a couple more places along the length of your skirt. Makes it a little easier to keep both pieces aligned as you're sewing. And so we're going to sew all the way down the center front of our skirt. Make sure that your notches are aligned and that you only have 1 notch. That'll let you know that this is the center of our skirt and not the side of our skirt. The side of our skirt has 2 notches. So using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, we're going to sew all the way down. Now you're going to sew the center back of our skirt the same way. So set this one aside and grab your other 2 pieces. And of course, if yours has a right sides, then your right side, your fabric should be right sides facing. And you're going to sew it the same way. Once you're done sewing the center back, go ahead and finish off the edges using your serger or a zigzag seam, and then we're going to open this up and attach front to back. I went ahead and serged the center seam of my skirt and I pressed it to one side, so go ahead and give it a good press. You always want to press your seams after you sew them. And so starting at the waist, which is of course the smaller side, we're going to place them with right sides together, and we're going to sew down both sides. So go ahead and pin one side, align those double notches, and you can pin a couple more places all the way down just to help you keep all of this fabric together. And using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're going to sew all the way down. You're going to sew both side seams the same exact way. You're going to sew all the way down one side and then all the way down the other side using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then if you have a serger, go ahead and finish off those edges. And then once we're done with that, we'll go ahead and attach the skirt to our bodice. Now that you've sewn your skirt on both sides, turn it right sides out. And what you're going to do is you're going to have the skirt turned right side out and the bodice part turned wrong side out. And you're going to slip your skirt inside of your bodice. And you're going to match your side seams and your center seams of your skirt and your top, and you're going to pin them matching side seams and front seams. And then you're going to sew it with 1.25 inch seam allowance, because we're going to use the seam allowance of this to create a casing for our elastic. Once you've sewn all the way around, go ahead and take it to your serger and finish off the edges. Do not cut off your seam allowance. We need that 1.25 inches, or use your zigzag stitch on your sewing machine. So now when you open up your dress, you can see that there's this little flappy thing. That's going to become our casing. So what we're going to do is we're going to stitch it down and then leave an opening where we can put our elastic through. So I'm going to slip my dress through my arm, and I'm going to make sure that the little casing is facing up towards the bodice, not towards the skirt. And starting at one side seam, you're going to sew close to the edge all the way around. We're going to stop short about 1.5 inches so we can sift our elastic through. And just make sure that you don't have anything catching underneath. You're just sewing the casing onto the bodice. You want to make sure everything's flat as you're sewing. Okay, now we're going to stop about 1.5 inches before my starting point. Back stitch. Now go grab your elastic. Okay, I've cut a piece of elastic, and you're going to cut your elastic the same measurement that you took for your waist minus 4.5 inches. So the elastic should be 4.5 inches less than your waist measurement. And you're going to get a safety pin, and you're going to put the safety pin through the top of your elastic like this. And then we're going to be working in that little opening that we left. And you're going to put your elastic in. And you're going to literally just thread it through. Make sure you don't lose the other end of your elastic. So just keep an eye on it as we go all the way around. Once you take out the other end through the opening, you're going to overlap them by about 1/4 inch, and you're just going to stitch them together. Back stitch a couple of times. So that you can join your elastic, and then pull it all the way through and pull your waistband to evenly distribute the gathers. All that's left to do is to go ahead and close out the opening that we had left to sift through. So you can go ahead and locate your opening. Insert your needle while you're pulling because you don't want it all bunched up. So just pull it so it's flat and just close the opening. Turn the dress inside out. And we are almost done. All that's left to do is to sew the hem of your skirt or your dress, and you are all done. Now I'm going to sew the hem of my skirt by folding it over once by 1/2 inch and then folding it over again so that I have a nice clean finish. And then I'm going to sew right along the edge. This is a double fold, so fold over 1/2 inch once and then fold over again and sew close to the edge. You're going to do that all the way around, and we are all done. You're all done. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I will talk to you guys again real soon. Peace.